Hello and welcome to Long COVID Foundation podcast. This is the channel where we share education and information on long COVID to help you understand your symptoms better. If you are new to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe button because I can help you to get answers relevant to your symptoms. And don't forget to give a video a like because it tells me that these videos are helpful, and at the same time it motivates me to create more content for you. Today we're learning on nutrition. So let's jump into our interview. Hello and welcome to the channel. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Conor Kerley. He's a doctor of nutrition, award-winning researcher, patient living with multiple sclerosis for 20 years, and a founder of scientific nutrition company Phytaphix. Conor got COVID in December 2020, but luckily the only symptoms were smell and taste loss. Since then, Conor has been looking for a way to help people with COVID and long COVID, including with targeted nutritional approaches. So Conor, welcome to our channel.
Delighted to be here, Valentina.
Well, you have extensive experience working with nutrition, and before I will go into digging down into all of them, if time will allow, I would love to hear your story and how you came to study nutrition and anything that you've learned in terms of pandemic, any changes that it brought to you, to your extensive experience.
Yeah, so my story starts when I was in my teens and I was a keen athlete, mostly playing basketball, actually, would you believe? And then one morning I woke up and I couldn't walk, I couldn't move. And anyway, long story short, I was eventually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. That was 2002. So I've had MS for 20 years now, and thank God things are still going well. But that really changed my perspective from wanting to be an athlete to wanting to be healthy and then wanting to help others get healthy. So I decided to study dietetics, nutrition at Trinity College here in Dublin. And from there, I went on and did a clinical doctorate with the School of Medicine at the University College in Dublin, UCD. And then I've worked in America and Australia. And as I mentioned, I came back to Ireland to kind of leverage my own research to help formulate really scientific nutrition approaches and products to help different disorders like blood pressure, like blood sugar. Unfortunately, COVID-19 hit the world, as we all know, and completely cancelled all of those plans. So we had to change our direction with the company, but that's a very quick introduction to me and how I've gotten here.
So we know that nutritions are vital to prevent serious diseases, and we would love to hear your expertise on how to keep healthy diet and improve well-being of those who suffer for months with post-viral condition. And I will start with very widely discussed vitamin D. So we know that vitamin D is mostly known as an essential for strong bones. However, we see now it has a wider range of benefits. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. As you mentioned, you know, traditionally vitamin D was always thought of as important for bone health and just bone health, but more modern science has shown that vitamin D is really important for nearly every function all over the body. What's really interesting is we actually have vitamin D receptors in pretty much every type of cell in the body. So a brain cell, a bone cell, an immune cell, all the different types of immune cells, cells in the breast, cells in the prostate, etc., etc. And vitamin D has been shown to be so beneficial. What's really interesting about vitamin D is that the major source of it is not the diet. The major source is sunlight, even in little Ireland here where the sun isn't too strong. But of course, my patients always ask me, how do you know that you're making vitamin D? And there's a very simple rule called Kerley's rule. And that is you want your shadow to be shorter than your body. So if you imagine sometimes you're walking on the beach late in the evening and your shadow is really, really long and you can see it for 20, 30 meters, no vitamin D. Whereas if you go out kind of in around like 11 a.m., 2 p.m., you'll see your shadow being quite short on the body, on the ground. And that means vitamin D production is possible. And of course, we don't need a lot of sun. Probably 10 or 15 minutes with someone with Caucasian skin like me or you, Valentina, is enough. But as I always say, I recommend more skin for less time. So in other words, shorts and a vest for 10 or 15 minutes, as opposed to going out with just your face for 1 or 2 hours. And of course, if someone has darker skin, they can still produce vitamin D. They just need a little bit longer, up to 5 or 10 times longer, depending on how dark the skin is. And that's why we see higher vitamin D deficiency rates in those with darker skin colors.
So which foods are rich in vitamin D?
Yeah, so this is a question I always get, and this is a really important question because, as I just mentioned, sun is the major source, and even in the UK and Canada and North America and Ireland, where I am, but what foods contain vitamin D? Well, the major source really is fatty, oily fish like salmon, sardines, and mackerel. Unfortunately, white fish like cod or whiting is actually very low in vitamin D. And apart from that, there's a small, tiny amount in eggs, particularly the egg yolk. And then in terms of vegan or vegetarian sources, we'd be looking at things like mushrooms, which have themselves been exposed to the sun, or fortified foods. But most, for example, soy milks and breakfast cereals now are fortified with vitamin D. But really, there's only a handful of sources. For example, you can have a really healthy meal with wholemeal pasta and broccoli and chickpeas, zero vitamin D in there.
So can you get enough vitamin D just with food? Even if you know that these products contain maximum vitamin D, can you get enough?
So in theory, yes, but in practice, it is extremely difficult. And this is why when we actually look at vitamin D measurements in countries all over the world, they can tend to go up in the summer and down in the winter. Even though the diet doesn't change hugely from summer to winter, people will still be eating fish if they like fish. So really, to get the minimum amount of vitamin D, you would need to probably eat 2 to 3 fillets of salmon every single day. You're probably talking about 20 or 30 liters of milk, fortified milk, because standard milk doesn't contain vitamin D. You're probably talking about maybe 100 eggs. So you can see it's really difficult to get purely from the diet. And this is why some governments, for example, in the UK, recommend a vitamin D supplement in the wintertime for everybody. But it is really important that if you're not eating a large portion of fish every day or lots of fortified foods, you are going to need a vitamin D supplement, unless you happen to live in a really sunny country all year round.
Now, how in terms of vitamin D role plays when we have pandemic of coronavirus?
Yeah, so vitamin D is really crucial in these COVID times. For example, people may have changed their diet. People may not have access to the shops. People may be cocooning at home, so they're not getting out, getting into the sunshine and so on. But in terms of the actual virus itself, so early on we saw, and I was involved in research here in Dublin, showing that people with low levels of vitamin D were more likely to get coronavirus or COVID-19, and they were also more likely to get more severe disease. Now, that is a nice observation, but we want to know, does vitamin D actually prevent COVID-19 or can that help treat it? And that's a little bit more controversial. But there's been about 20 studies done using different types of vitamin D and different forms of vitamin D where they actually provide supplements to COVID-19 patients. And about 10 of them did not show any benefit. So it just didn't work. But crucially, it didn't cause any harm. And the other 10 actually did show a benefit for things like inflammation, blood clotting markers, and muscle health, and even hospitalizations and death just from vitamin D supplements. So in my opinion, when we talk about vitamin D, it's very safe, it's very cheap, it's very accessible. It may not be it's definitely not a cure, but it may have a small benefit. And that for me is worthwhile. To think about vitamin D supplements. And if anybody is interested in vitamin D supplements, I would advise speaking to your pharmacist, GP, or dietitian.
In terms of having a single IV dose of vitamin D, which is much higher that you would imagine taking on daily basis, what difference it makes long term for people's health?
When somebody consumes vitamin D as a supplement or in food or even gets it from the sun, what happens is it goes to the liver and it's transformed into what we call a vitamin D metabolite. And that's the one we measure in the blood. But we can't really get that in the diet, and we can't get it as a supplement over the counter. You can get it prescribed. There's a third type of vitamin D where that metabolite from the liver is actually sent to the kidneys, or actually really any tissue in the body can actually transform it again into a third vitamin D metabolite. And that's actually a hormone called calcitriol. So when we talk about vitamin D, we can give, normal standard vitamin D, we can give the liver vitamin D, which is called calcidiol, or we can give the kidney vitamin D, which is called calcitriol. The calcitriol is the hormonal type, and that is that needs to be very tightly regulated, just like all hormones. So we shouldn't be, prescribing that or taking that. The second one, calcidiol, the advantage of using that is the body doesn't have to do any production itself. So the liver doesn't have to work. We could just take it straight away. I'm not aware of any supplements in Europe anyway which can provide that, but I think it is available by prescription. But the dosages are very different because you don't have to convert it inside the body's own liver. But then just going back to standard vitamin D, there are two main types, vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. And vitamin D3 is the one that I recommend. That's the one we get in oily fish. It's the one we get in the sun. And that is definitely the one which has superior bioavailability. Vitamin D2 is the one we get from mushrooms and some vegan sources, and some supplements, but I would recommend vitamin D3.
All right, so what about vitamin D, which goes together with vitamin K2?
Yeah, so there's more and more interest in this, because vitamin K2 is also a fat-soluble vitamin like vitamin D, and there is some evidence that they actually do work together. Just like a lot of nutrients work together and in a process we call synergy. There isn't enough evidence that vitamin K2, which is very rare in the diet, like vitamin D, and vitamin K2 and vitamin D3 work together. And there's not enough evidence to show a real clinical benefit of that. But we know that, for example, vitamin K1 is found mostly in green vegetables, and most people don't eat enough vegetables. And as I say, vitamin K2 is really rare in the diet. It's really found in like kind of a Japanese fermented soybean product, which is very rare and consumed anywhere in the world. I've never even tasted it. But it is possible to convert vitamin K1 into vitamin K2 in the body, as long as the gut is nice and healthy, and of course that we eat enough vitamin K1. So certainly something that is worthwhile, and it's worthwhile thinking about. But just remember, eat your greens as well.
Thank you so much. So this was on vitamin D.